We're now hearing for the first time from John Doe, one of the P. Diddy accusers who's now broken his silence. It's been years since his alleged sexual assault, and still, he says, quote, "The full gravity of it lives with me to this day." So let's start with John Doe's lawsuit. That was filed in October of this year. We've reported on this era of the P. Diddy saga a lot. It's when we first heard that name Tony Busby and learned of the dozens, if not hundreds of suits he plans to file against P. Diddy. Now, this came just weeks after Diddy was indicted on federal charges of racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, and transportation to engage in prostitution. And those same allegations make an appearance in many civil lawsuits against Diddy, including this very one filed by John Doe. John Doe's allegations date back to 2006 at one of Diddy's renowned white parties. Here's how the lawsuit describes them. Sean Combs' infamous white parties were legendary events, known for their exclusivity, extravagance, and strict dress code, where attendees were required to wear all white. These high-profile parties, particularly those held at Combs' estate in the Hamptons, attracted A-list celebrities from across the entertainment, fashion, and business worlds. The events were lavishly decorated, featured live music performances, and boasted top-tier food and beverages. The atmosphere at these parties was one of opulence and luxury, often making headlines for their celebrity guest lists, over-the-top entertainment, and the stunning aesthetics of the event. John Doe says the assault happened back in 2006 when he was employed by a security firm, Mass Security, where he provided security services for nightclubs and private events. In August of that year, plaintiff accepted a last-minute job at Combs' East Hampton property, which he believed was hosting an exclusive white party for a large, affluent crowd. Plaintiff noted that the guests arrived in luxury vehicles, and many appeared to be executives. John Doe says right when he got to the party, Diddy himself greeted John Doe. Apparently, Diddy liked to meet with all the staff and the security members at his parties. Now, according to John Doe, things started off completely normal with Diddy. They chatted, and Diddy was friendly. He even offered John Doe another future security job right on the spot. But John Doe turned that one down at the time because his father was severely ill. And to that, Diddy appeared sympathetic and understanding. So things started off normally, and John Doe seemed friendly with Diddy. But as the evening progressed, Combs allegedly targeted plaintiff and provided him with 2 alcoholic drinks throughout the night. After consuming the second drink, plaintiff, that's John Doe, began to feel extremely ill and leaned against his truck for support. Based on information and belief, Combs, by himself or through his agents or employees, previously laced the drink with drugs, including, but not limited to, GHB and/or ecstasy. This behavior towards plaintiff mimics a pattern of Combs and his agents/employees drugging unsuspecting victims in order to make it easier for Combs to sexually assault the person. At first, though, Diddy seemed to express concern for John Doe that he might even be sick, but things quickly took a turn. And here's a trigger warning. This next part gets graphic and disturbing. John Doe soon found himself being forcibly pushed into an open van by Combs, an act that left him in considerable pain. Once inside the van, plaintiff was allegedly held down by Combs, who overpowered him while he struggled to escape due to the effects of the drugs in his system. In a horrific turn of events, Combs allegedly sexually assaulted plaintiff by inserting his penis into plaintiff's anus and sodomizing him, all the while dismissing plaintiff's pleas for help by repeatedly saying, "You'll be all right." After all this, Diddy simply hopped out of the van and headed back to the party. According to this suit, John Doe struggled to leave the party due to the drugs he believed to be in his system from the alcoholic drinks Combs provided. As he was leaving the party, he experienced a disturbing sensation as a lubricant-like fluid leaked from him, which he believed to be semen, causing him profound disgust. Upon arriving home and showering, plaintiff noticed more semen discharge, which intensified his feelings of violation and revulsion. Eventually, John Doe informed his supervisor about this incident, but says he was never hired by Mass Security again. In the lawsuit, John Doe says he's faced ongoing emotional pain and mental issues for years, saying he feels disgusted and depressed. He says it's affected his personal life too, saying he struggles to maintain relationships because of the assault. This lawsuit was filed back on October 14th, but just this week, John Doe finally broke his silence in a CNN interview. He chose to remain anonymous, so his face was darkened and his name was not made public. But he did double down on the allegations against Diddy, describing how intense the assault was and how the aftermath of this party still affects him daily. He said, quote, "The full gravity of it lives with me to this day. It affects every single thing you do for the rest of your life." He talked about the night of the white party too, saying he wasn't able to stand after having 2 drinks, saying it felt more like he had 15. He called it, quote, "incapacitation I had never experienced before and I felt powerless." John Doe told CNN that he was never asked to work for the mass security firm again. About his manager, John Doe said, quote, "He just dismissed it and said, 'I'll talk to him.' After that, he didn't talk to me again. He cut me out of everything. I was totally blacklisted after that. I had to find a different field." Because of this emotional fallout, John Doe told CNN that his marriage ended, saying the trauma negatively impacted his relationships. Here's where things get a little tricky though. According to the initial filing, John Doe had never been married. The initial filing also states the assault happened in 2006, but John Doe told CNN it actually happened in 2007. In 2006, Diddy's white party was held in Saint-Tropez, but John Doe claimed the assault happened in the Hamptons. About all this, John Doe's team filed an amended complaint changing those details. They said mistakes were made because they rushed to file. Hey, so I'm gonna take a guess and say a lot of you who watch our videos might be business owners, maybe even some sort of side hustle you're trying to build. That's why I wanna talk to you about our awesome sponsor, Odoo. Odoo is a free all-in-one business management software, and it provides you with a range of apps that help with the day-to-day of owning a business. One of my personal favorite apps is their project apps. So there are multiple views in the project app, like the Kanban view that organizes tasks by stage, or there's the Gantt view that gives you a timeline of your tasks. It seriously makes things so simple and easy to organize. Also in this projects app, you can directly bill your customers according to time spent on tasks, and that's just really a big time saver. So right now, you can click our link odoo.com/lcnews and try Odoo and their projects app for free today. So let's take a deep dive into this lawsuit, and here to give us a closer look, we've got criminal defense attorney and former assistant prosecutor Mike Korbanix. Mike, it's always great when you come on with us.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Okay, so we've been talking about P. Diddy for almost a year now at this point, and the slew of civil lawsuits just keep coming. We've read the intense details in a lot of these suits, but now we're hearing from the accuser, not just legal jargon, we're hearing his actual emotions in relation to this alleged assault. What are your thoughts on that?
It's a very interesting sort of case because, first of all, the thing that really throws me on this, being a lawyer and trying cases, is the amount of time that has passed since these accusations were made. And another interesting thing in this case is he is claiming he was under the influence of drugs and narcotics because of drinks he got. And that would absolutely be a question at trial as to, especially something that happened, what is it now, 17 years ago?
Yeah.
How could your memory be enough to meet the burdens of proof? Now, granted, this isn't a criminal case where it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. You only need proof by a preponderance of evidence, which is about 51% to carry it forward. But I think that's a big question here.
It's interesting, you're kind of talking about it, you're putting your defense attorney cap on, what Diddy's team would say about things, which is good. I mean, that is what they would bring up. Hey, this happened decades ago almost at this point. Is your memory, in fact, 100%? But if we're talking about the plaintiff's side of things, I'm wondering if this would be helpful for them. The fact that he says he was drugged by Diddy, and that's very similar to a pattern we've seen in a lot of other lawsuits, civil side, and of course, the federal suit that has been filed against him. So do you think that part helps, the fact that this kind of establishes a pattern, something that Diddy allegedly did a lot?
Absolutely. I mean, when you're in trial, every question could cut both ways. And this absolutely could, because that would be the argument for them that this was part of the process of getting a person into a situation where Diddy could then sexually abuse him. So that would not that cuts both ways, and it's an interesting point to make.
Do you think that John Doe's team would also mention? I know that you brought up this happened so long ago, but potentially they would mention, hey, this is a really traumatic thing. It's very common for sexual assault survivors to take their time to come forward, if at all, because it's something they're dealing with. I mean, is that something they would highlight in order to bolster the reason for the filing at the time it was filed?
Absolutely. That's something that's very commonly known, and that happens in civil cases as well as criminal cases. I mean, I was a former sexual prosecutor, so I have dealt with those way back when. And that is a big question. But there's an interesting question in this case, being in New York State, is the fact that I don't do civil work in New York State, but the fact that there's a question here, from what I see, as to the statute of limitations as to this. Now, I understand that in 2019, New York put the statute of limitations to 20 years. However, this happened back in 2007 when the statute of limitations was 5 years. So the question of can they even bring it, since it didn't interact where it could be an extension, it passed in 2012, but the amendment didn't happen until 2019.
So there's lots of questions about all of that, whether this will hold based on the statute of limitations. And you mentioned specifically this happened in the year 2007. I want to touch on that because in the initial filing for John Doe, that was back in October, he said this happened in 2006. Then he now breaks his silence in an exclusive CNN interview, says it was 2007. So CNN points this out. Hey, 2006, 2007, which is it? They mention, okay, we were just rushing to file. That's why we had the discrepancy. It said 2006. It was really 2007. Is that a bad thing for his side? I mean, the fact that they had a year wrong, the date.
Well, I got to talk as a real lawyer there, because sometimes you make typographical errors. Sometimes these things are, you're working off perhaps an old complaint, which has a legal data you need in it, and you make a typographical error. You didn't change a name, you didn't do something, because there's certain parts of the allegations that have to be the same in every case. So I don't think it's that big a deal, especially when the question is, he never said he was in Saint Tropez, where I think that was the question. He was in New York, so that was just a mistake or maybe a typographical error. So I don't think it's that big a deal.
Yeah, it's good to know lawyers make typos too. We're not all completely perfect. So that's a good point, Mike. And they did refile and put 2007 in it. I want to talk about more about his interview too to CNN. He remained anonymous, obviously, in the lawsuit. He's listed as John Doe. And then he decides to speak out to CNN, but we don't see his face. We don't see his name, any of that. Why do you think he chose to speak out but still remain anonymous?
Well, I would imagine, quite frankly, that one of the reasons is he's feared for his own safety. He doesn't know. I mean, P. Diddy is a famous person. People are following this. There's people watching our show. There's people very familiar with this. And so I would assume that he doesn't want to be someone who, if he goes out to dinner somewhere, somebody says, oh, that's that guy we saw on CNN, and, harass him and things of that nature. So I think that's very understandable.
What do you think about this interview in general? Do you think it would help or hurt his case? I mean, if this does go to jury trial, and obviously Diddy's got a lot of lawsuits that are kind of lined up for all of that, but let's say this one specifically does, could Diddy's team pull this interview and even use it against him?
Absolutely. I'm not a big fan of going and having my clients go on TV and be interviewed and things of that nature. Number one is that's really not admissible in court unless it becomes some sort of consistency or something of that matter. And also, you've got to be careful, because jurors are going to be asked, how are you familiar with this case? And is that familiarity with that case going to make you prejudicial in your decisions here? So if you saw that, I would think any lawyer would ask the judge to dismiss that person from the jury, because they have a preconceived notion and they're supposed to start from square one to be fair and be basically like, the first time I'm hearing this case is in the jury box. And that's a problem with that.
Yeah, that's definitely something tricky, something to think about in regards to doing these very public interviews. I mean, on CNN, we're talking about it. So people all over are kind of touching on it. But for the other side of things, for John Doe himself, I'm wondering if it was helpful in the way of he was describing how this affected his life. He said he's had to deal with the emotional and traumatic stress of it ever since this happened. He said something I want to read. He wrote, quote, "I was screaming, telling him to stop. It was incapacitation I had never experienced before, and I felt powerless." So if the jury is in fact hearing this interview, let's just say, do you think that's helpful, showing him the emotional side of things?
Well, it could be helpful for his case, but it could be prejudicial for P. Diddy's defense in the case, where then it will become an issue in jury selection.
Okay, so a lot of that is speculation anyway. We'll see what happens if this eventually does go to jury trial. Just talking about what he said, though, in this interview, do you think if he was to go on the stand, do you think that would be helpful for his team?
It could be, as long as he's consistent with the testimony on the stand, as he said in the interview. And that's that interview though did seem to have a lot of generalization, not too much specific things being said. And quite frankly, it's difficult to be specific about something that happened 17 years ago.
It's interesting when we're talking P. Diddy because right now today we're talking about civil cases. And for the bulk of the time we've been covering Diddy, it's been civil because it took quite a while for those criminal charges to be filed. But we do have the criminal side of things too. Obviously, that's kind of taking priority to all of these civil allegations. But something I ask every time is, do you think that the prosecution, the US government, could call on some of these accusers, John Doe, this specific John Doe, for instance, or other Jane Does, or even ones who have made their names public, to testify in the criminal case against him?
Absolutely. These would be people that they would, even if they don't call them to testify, they would definitely be people they'd want to interview in preparation for their trial to make sure that everything they have in their proofs is consistent with what they believe it to be. And if these people back it up or show that there's something incorrect, I think they actually have an obligation to do that to make sure they're on the right path in prosecuting P. Diddy.
And if we're talking about the sheer number of accusers there have been, it's honestly almost hard to keep up with the number of lawsuits that have been filed. It seems like weekly we're getting more and more. Apparently, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of people who allege that they have been accused by or have been assaulted rather by P. Diddy. So with that in mind, how is P. Diddy's team dealing with that? Obviously, the criminal side of things is going to kind of take precedence, but what about the overwhelming number of civil suits they're also facing?
Well, one of the interesting things about that, I hope I'm correct in this, is almost all the people in the civil suits are represented by the same lawyer. And that's a little unusual to me. It'll be interesting how P. Diddy will be, his representation will be looking at that to see, is there something here that is basically just trying to get numbers so we look like we're more credible, yet these people are all from the same place. So I think that's an interesting issue, and it's something unusual to me in my experience. I haven't seen that many people represented by the same firm in a civil case.
How does all of that play into the criminal side of things? Because you're right, Tony Busby is the one who's filed most of these, and he's been in the news a lot lately because another person has filed suit against him. But again, he's coming forward with all these allegations. Is this at all going to affect criminal side of things?
I don't believe so at this point in time. The only time it could come up is if it is a question of credibility of a witness, but nothing that's going to happen in a civil case will be admissible in the criminal case because they're two separate burdens of proof.
And just this week, it was announced that even more lawsuits were going to be filed against P. Diddy on the civil side of things, even more accusations coming forward. So I guess we're going to learn more about the allegations against Diddy in the coming days and weeks. Mike, thank you for coming on with us today to talk about John Doe and the allegations he made.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
About all these allegations, it's important to note that P. Diddy denies the claims and he's pleaded not guilty to the federal charges against him. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Gillespie.